In this video, I'm going to talk about networking and the role that it plays in the consulting interview preparation process, as well as some of the general best practices for networking and relationship building. Networking interaction is actually a critical part of the consulting interview. One, it's necessary in order to get an interview in the first place. Consulting is, in general, a very relationship-oriented profession. You're dealing with clients and colleagues, and so the interpersonal interactions are critical, and so that's largely assessed through your networking. Secondly, networking is an important tool in terms of information gathering and also conveying your background and your interest and motivation to become a consultant in the first place. So it plays a large role in the steps that you need to go through to gain an interview and be invited to interview with particular consulting firms. To begin this conversation, we're going to first lay out some of the overarching principles about networking and then drill a little bit down further into the process, how to actually engage, and then how to build advocacy with the different individuals that you're actually having those networking conversations with. So in Networking 101, the introduction, I just want to talk about some of the general principles related to networking. Overall, one important definition to keep in mind is that networking is really about developing a mutually beneficial relationship. The key word there is mutual. It's valuable to you and the other party. In the context of consulting interviews, if we think very clearly about what you're trying to accomplish, you're meeting and introducing yourself to potential hiring organizations and the consultants. This is important to them because the main asset of a consulting firm are its people. They are in the job of meeting talented individuals. So it is mutual by definition because new people, new talent are critical to the ongoing growth and great things that consulting firms do. So networking also has this aspect of an exchange of information, advice, and it's well known and well understood the purpose of networking. There's nothing secret to it, especially in the job search process. There are definitely some myths or what I would consider some mindsets that many people have about networking. And these are often the questions that I get when I'm having coaching sessions with individuals. So one myth is that the purpose of networking is to get a job. Well, in fact, the purpose of networking is different in a way. It's really about getting information. Now, by no means are you not trying to get a job through your networking efforts, but the networking itself isn't the direct link to the job. The information that you gather, the value of that is incredibly powerful, and that information can be a key ingredient into your success in ultimately getting a job offer. A second myth is that you should only talk to people who can directly help you. That's also not exactly what you want to be doing in your networking. The fact is that everyone that you talk to creates some type of possibility. I know in my own experience, I had done a number of different networking conversations with colleagues and friends of mine. I happened to, at one point early in my career when I was in business school, speak to a former coworker of mine at a previous company. And I came to find out that she was working with a group of consultants. And I asked for an introduction from her to one of the engagement leaders, which she created. And ultimately, I struck up a very good conversation with that individual, which ultimately led to my interview with that firm. When I reached out to her, I really had no idea whether or not she might directly be able to connect me to a consultant. I was just lucky, but I knew that she probably had some perspective on it. So keep that in mind because you just never know what connections that people have. Another myth is that the person that you're reaching out to is going to be annoyed or bothered by your networking request. That certainly is not true. particularly when we're dealing with alumni from our institutions and, again, the consultants at these firms, because networking is really a part of their job. Many of the consultants are part of the recruiting process. And I think in general, people want to help other people. They receive that help themselves, and many cases they're trying to pay it forward. So don't worry about feeling like you're going to be in a position. And then the last myth is that there's no benefit from talking with someone who can't hire me. Again, you just never know. A lot of times the most important job lead, it comes from the third or the fourth or the fifth person that you might actually engage with. So talking to a family friend who knows someone at a company who has a colleague that works in a consulting firm, you just never know how many layers it's going to take to get to that connection. Now, in fact, many cases when you're a student, you're going to have a much more direct connection. But it could be that there's someone in a particular practice area or an industry group that you want to be speaking to, and it might take a couple of individuals. So don't worry about that. Talk to the person, maybe it's a shorter conversation, and then keep pushing through those layers in the network to get to the person that you're going to have the most fruitful conversation with. At a macro level, there's two important aspects to networking and its usefulness in your job search. One side of it is the research that you're doing. It's actually a source of primary research. The other piece then is selling yourself, selling your interest, what your capabilities are, what your background is. The key thing in your networking is to distinguish between what you're doing to learn and build your knowledge of the consulting role and the firm itself, and then how you're selling your background. And we'll talk about that later towards the end of the video and how you really migrate through those two things depending on the timeline in which you're networking. So your goals overall to keep in mind, and this relates to both networking and in general the research that you're going to be doing about the firm. One is to learn more information about that firm. Ultimately, you're going to incorporate that information into your cover letter and then into the interviews that you're conducting. You're going to be able to tailor your comments to a particular firm. Secondly, it's important to share your interest in the firm. Consulting firms and companies in general, they want to hire people who want to work for them. And you can definitely distinguish one candidate from another based on their enthusiasm and in many cases based on their knowledge. The third thing is to provide a few points of information about your capabilities relevant to that firm and consulting in general. So again, the more targeted that you are in your comments, the more alignment you're going to have. And then finally, and in general, you want to demonstrate the critical skills and the presence that are necessary to be a consultant. Research in general is important to the job of a consultant. Networking in one way is important to being a consultant because you're consistently building relationships with clients and demonstrating your ability to have conversation and apply your interpersonal skills. So you definitely need to do these things in the job. The process of networking, it's really a little bit of showing versus telling your skill set. Overall, your research and networking should lead to two things. One, it's going to help you get selected for an interview. The second is helping you get an offer because you know the firm. You've been able to tailor your comments to them. Perhaps their case interview style is something specific, and you've been able to practice and prepare a little bit more towards the style of that firm. So there is a direct impact and return on the investment that you spend in networking and the research that you gather through that networking. As you go along, there is a tremendous amount of information. What I've tried to do here is to summarize the types of things that it might be useful for you to understand about that firm. There's definitely a great deal of information. I think we all know that many of the consulting firms on their website, they publish various white papers and perspectives and overviews, and they have links to the books that some of their professionals have written. You could spend an extraordinary amount of time reading through that material. That might not be possible. So it's important to focus what you're looking for and what's going to be most useful to you in the interview process. So a few things that I have found to be important. One is the overview of the firm, who they are, their background, how they think about themselves, how they convey their work, and how they think about clients. That relates to their philosophy, their mission, their approach. This is particularly important, by the way, for some of the boutique firms. I think it's also relevant to understand how the firm is organized. The industries, how they describe those industries, their service offerings, their groups, and how they think about professionals aligned within the organization of that firm. It tells you a little bit about how they operate and how the hiring process works. Additionally, you can look at the terminology of the firms. Not all consulting firms speak exactly the same language. As a simple illustration, some firms for their projects, they call them studies or cases or projects. Even the nature of just the simple consulting assignment, there's different terminology that's used. So it's helpful to understand that and then to be able to tailor your language to that firm. Also, you can find out things about the profiles of the candidates. These are presented on their career sections, and it's useful to look at that, to just understand the backgrounds of those individuals and how you align with that and how similar you are. There's a level of affiliation here that's important. Some firms will talk about their consulting model and how they approach it. There's also all of that information about their point of view, their recent perspectives. They present a great deal of information about their projects. They'll often talk about a typical client project that they've worked on, give some background, talk about the problem that they were facing, the scope, the result of that engagement. That can be very useful to understand particularly different practice areas and service lines of the firm. There's also obviously some things about the culture and the experience of consultants, what type of engagements they've worked on, the variety of those engagements, the responsibilities, and particularly as consultants move from level to level, what their experiences look like and how their skill set is building and growing and expanding. Obviously, there's an interest in the professional development, how the firm does that. There may be things that you're particularly interested in, such as an international assignment if you're based in the US, and how you might go about pursuing that. If you're based in an international office, how you may have some level of mobility. So learning about that can be helpful. And then obviously there are exit considerations. There may be particular professional goals that you have, and some firms may align with that in a much stronger way. And then finally, there's the interview process itself. Through your research, you can learn about that. What are the styles of interviews? Some firms use team cases. They have different tests and interview approaches. So learning about all of that can be useful. There's quite a lot. And there's also multiple ways that you can go about that. Certainly you can read and do secondary research. There's an extraordinarily amount of information on the internet today. Take advantage of that. Then through your networking, there are significant numbers of individuals that you can speak with, affiliated with your university, professionals that you may have contact with. And I think one of the great resources to be able to talk to are former consultants, those who may have left the firm. They can give you perhaps a multi-sided perspective, some of the good, some of the bad, and that's useful as information. Really take advantage of the opportunity to go out and get this information.